An interval is the distance between one note and another. If two notes are played at the same time, then it's a harmonic interval. If one note comes after another, then it's a melodic interval. Intervals are described by their number and quality. For example, a perfect fifth. What that means is the number describes the note distance between the two notes, and the quality is fine-tuning the distance so we know exactly where it is. In major scales, these are the intervals that you naturally find in them. They're either all major or perfect. In minor scales, only the third, sixth, and seventh become minor to fit the key signature. This sets up a foundation of knowing the difference between major and minor intervals because they're linked to our major and minor scales. So now we kinda understand what an interval is, I'll go into detail about the number and quality. So for finding the distance of an interval, I like to think of it in semitones. Like a major third is 4 semitones away from the root. 1, 2, 3, 4. This makes it a lot easier to find out the quality of the interval. Why? Because a minor interval is a major interval minus 1 semitone. A perfect interval is only for fourths, fifths, and octaves, and unisons, they're kind of the same thing. Think of it like the normal interval. An augmented interval is a major interval and a perfect interval plus 1 semitone. A diminished interval is a minor interval and a perfect interval minus 1 semitone. Basically, perfect intervals can't be major or minor because when you raise them or flatten them, they become augmented or diminished. Here's an example to work out. I'm going to find the distance of the note first by going up 7 semitones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then I'm going to look for any accidentals in the top note, and would you look at that, it's been flattened. So because this is a fifth, I know that if it's flattened, then it goes from being a perfect fifth to a diminished fifth. Here's another one. I'll work out the distance in semitones. So that's 9 semitones, which means it's a sixth. Now I'll look back to see if there are any accidentals. And what a relief, there aren't any. So it's just a major sixth. Intervals can be found literally everywhere in music. For example, somewhere over the rainbow, the first interval heard is an octave. It's the most cliche example for explaining intervals, but it gets the job done. Anyways, if you really learn your intervals well, then forming chords becomes super duper easy. Now for some important stuff on intervals. When applying this to real music, we calculate all intervals from the bottom note, even if they're a melodic interval. If the bottom note has an accidental, then we calculate the interval from that note. For example, if we have a major third and the bottom note gets sharpened, then the interval becomes 1 semitone smaller, so it's called a minor third. If we have an example of a third, that's a major third by the way, but the root is sharpened, that becomes a minor third because of the distance between this note and that note. And remember, we calculate all intervals from the bottom note. That's crucial. If this scale is written an octave lower, then it has been transposed an octave. Music can be transposed to any interval, but it can be a pain to do so. The way I go around this is to label the notes in relation to the scale of the key signature. So for example, this F would be written as 1 as it's the first note in the F major scale. The A would be written as a 3 as it's the third of the scale. Once you do this for the rest of them, you can just take the numbers and transfer them to the new key. So for D major, the 1 would mean D because it's the first note in the D major scale. The third would become F sharp because that's the third of D major scale. Harrison Brad Music has a really good video that talks more about this, which I'll link in the description if anyone's interested. If this method doesn't work for you, you can do it the other way of working out each interval, but I find this way a lot quicker. Also, just watch out for accidentals when transposing, because they can throw you off. But with the method I use, it's not really a problem as you think of it as a sharpened 4, which is easy to transpose as you write the note first, and then alter it by using a natural, so it becomes a sharpened 4 in F minor. All in all, transposing isn't as scary as people think. When you have an interval higher than an octave or an eighth, there are two main ways of writing it. You can keep on increasing the number up to 15, which is shown in this example. Here we have a major third and a major tenth. The major tenth is essentially a major third, but an octave higher. So the other way of writing this major tenth is to use the word compound and then write third, as compound implies it's an octave higher than a normal third. Here are two melodies. When we place them together, we get harmonic intervals. When we transpose the B melody an octave higher, it still sounds nice, but we get different intervals which form new harmony. Same thing applies when we transpose the A melody an octave lower. This graphic explains the idea perfectly. When we make the lower note an octave higher, or the upper note an octave lower, a second interval becomes a seventh interval, a third becomes a sixth, etc., etc. Perfect intervals like unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves stay perfect no matter what, but the other intervals flip round. Discords are intervals that sound unstable, like a tritone or a minor seventh. Concords are split into two types. There's perfect, which is stable sounding, like a perfect fifth, and imperfect, which still sounds stable, like a third or a sixth. Boiled down, what this theory means is discords want to resolve to a concord, for example, a second resolving to a third. The fourth interval is the exception to this rule, where it commonly resolves back to a third. Here's an example of this from Bach's St. John's Passion, Chorale 22. And now a question to test yourself. What is an interval? The distance between one note and another. And that's it. Hope you learned something, and I'll catch you dudes next time.